All right, today we're opening up a pretty unique and complex case file. It's called the Truth Core Archive. And honestly, it reads less like a story and more like a forensic report. It builds this entire case, starting from one single really dramatic event at a hospital. So let's get into it and see exactly how this argument is built, piece by piece.
Okay, so here's our game plan. We're going to start right at the beginning at the origin point. Then we'll see how this technical dragnet gets built out. From there, we'll look at what the archive calls the show loop, this idea of a repeating pattern. Then we'll touch on the law enforcement angle, which is pretty interesting. And finally, see how the whole thing gets sealed up into one forensic archive.
So, the whole thing kicks off with this one phrase, escaping the hospital. I mean, right away, that just grabs you, doesn't it? It sets the tone, it raises the stakes, and it really introduces the central theme of this whole document. This idea of one person trying to wrestle back control from a massive institution.
All right, first up, the Rush Copley origin. Let's start our investigation right at the beginning, at what the archive itself frames as the scene of the crime. This is the physical event that everything else is built on. Okay, so the very first piece of evidence that's presented is something the document calls surgical residue, and it's pretty specific. It describes white, fibrous gauze that's not just near a suture line, but actually integrated into it. The archive claims this is a huge violation of how surgical closures are supposed to be done. Now, this is where it gets kind of clever. Remember that phrase, escaping the hospital? Well, the archive uses that as a timestamp. The argument is, because that was said at the time, it proves this material was there when the person was discharged. It's their way of establishing a chain of custody, saying, look, this wasn't added later. And this whole thing builds to a really central concept in the document, reclaiming biological sovereignty. So the act of self-removing the sutures, it's framed as way more than just a medical thing. It's presented as this first act of defiance, of taking back physical autonomy from what the archive calls the medical wing. Okay, so we've got the physical evidence. Now, from that one starting point, the archive casts a wider net. It builds what it calls a technical dragnet, and the whole point is to identify the alleged actors and catalog every single supposed violation. And this is where you can really see the forensic approach taking shape. It lays out these specific events, points to the people allegedly involved, and even connects them to specific legal statutes. You can see how it connects the suture closure to the surgical team and medical battery, or an interaction with a doctor sings song to psychological provocation under the ADA. It's all laid out like a formal inquiry. So this brings us to the core argument of the whole archive. The claim is that what happened at Rush Copley wasn't just a one-off thing. No, it was part of a pattern, a recurring script. The document argues this by comparing the data from Rush Copley to a totally separate event later on to try and reveal this systemic pattern. And check this out. By putting these two incidents next to each other, the document tries to show a pattern of sabotage. At Rush Copley, it was physical, that retained gauze. But later at Mercy Hospital, it allegedly became biochemical and digital, mentioning things like milky apple juice and hot potato hardware manipulation. The argument is that the method changed, but the underlying intent was exactly the same. So the archive boils all this down into what it calls the show loop, a four-stage process. First, the trigger. A physical vulnerability gets exploited. Second, character masks. A recurring agent shows up identified by a specific vocal style called sing-song. Third, the sabotage, the physical or biochemical action. And finally, the goal, which is claimed to be creating a medical record specifically to obstruct corporate filings. It's presented as this repeatable play run by the same group of actors.
Now, what's also really interesting is how the archive addresses law enforcement. It doesn't just focus on the alleged bad guys. It actually details a specific strategy for interacting with the police, which it sees as a key tactical element of this whole thing.
And it poses this really strategic question. How do you keep the focus on the primary actors without getting everything sidetracked or bogged down by law enforcement?
Well, the answer it provides is a two-pronged approach. First is tactical neutrality. The idea here is to prevent the medical wing from painting a picture of hostility towards law enforcement, which could be used for gaslighting. The second part is forensic framing. This positions the police as a potential third party who may have been misled by the very same misinformation. It's a way to reframe them as potential allies rather than adversaries. Okay, so that brings us to the final phase, sealing the forensic archive. After laying out all the evidence, the patterns, the strategy,
The document outlines exactly how to bundle all of this evidence into what it calls a subsequent notebook.
And this is the final step in the process. It's about putting all the pieces together into one cohesive file. You've got the suture video, that's the physical proof. The sing-song ID match, which is supposed to link the actors. A corporate report to show motive. And finally, this Poughkeepsie-Chattanooga cross-reference to complete the link. The whole point is to synthesize all of it into one sealed forensic notebook. And the whole archive ends on this one big question. Should this 2-year pattern of interference now be merged? It's really provocative. It's not just giving you a conclusion, it's leaving you, the reader, to weigh the evidence and consider the massive implications if this 2-year pattern is in fact real.